Welcome to Lighten Up, the art of living clutter-free, the podcast where we tackle the literal and figurative clutter standing between you and your healthiest and happiest life. I'm Melanie, your host, coach, and guide on this journey to help you design a life that you love. Whether it's clearing out your kitchen cabinets, untangling your digital files, or letting go of the mental blocks that hold you back, we're here to make space for what truly matters. Let's lighten up together, starting now. Welcome back to another episode of Lighten Up, the art of living clutter-free. I'm your host, Melanie. I am your clutter coach, your weight loss coach, and today I have a special guest. His name is Bill, and crazy thing, we have the same last name. Wait, this is my husband. So for those of you who have been listening to the Lighten Up podcast over the last few months, I may have warned you this might happen. I am enjoying bringing on special guests who are experts in all areas of clutter, whether they knew it or not. And I have brought Bill here not because he's an expert on clutter, but because he's an expert on books. And I teased in last week's episode about spring cleaning that we would be talking about books today. So Bill, say hi to everybody out there.
Hello, everybody out there.
You want to fill anybody in on what you believe makes you an expert in books?
Sure. And first of all, I am not a ABAA, Antiquarian Book Association of America certified expert of any sort. I had a period in my life where books were very high up on my list of things that motivated me and excited me. And I would spend all my waking hours looking at books up on the internet or going to used bookstores or library sales. And I was a book scout in training and became a okay book scout. And then I got more into going to literary events and getting things signed and amassing a collection of poetry and some modern first editions. But my niche was poetry, and especially poetry anthologies.
But let's go back a little further, because don't you want to say something about what your mother did for a living?
My mother was an educator and a creative writing instructor and a speed reader and a lover of books. There are always books around. When I was a kid, some of my earliest memories were playing with her little mini Shakespeare editions, these like tiny little books that had the works of Shakespeare in them. And she had I would stack them up and I'd play with them and everything. And my dad also was a lover of books, although he dabbled more in political science, although he was also a huge fan of Kurt Vonnegut and was instrumental in getting me into that particular writer.
Well, do you want to say anything about what you studied in college?
I was an English major and a history minor and an aspiring poet and a published poet.
Someone who studied English and comparative literary studies. Is that what the major was called back then? English and comparative lit or something like that?
I think that's what it's called now. It was just called English back then. Like I was majored in how to speak English, but no, I was reading English and whatnot.
I also want to say I blame myself for it getting as bad as it did. So I have brought a little something for show and tell. I love to do things in theme. And for a first wedding anniversary, I discovered that the traditional gift is paper. I didn't know what kind of paper I was going to give him. Although maybe we should tell everybody that my mother sent us a case of paper, and it had toilet paper and it had paper napkins and paper towels. She would be horrified to hear us saying that right now because of the environment. But I decided I was going to get you a book because you were expressing interest in books. You had worked part-time at Barnes & Noble. And I went into a bookstore in Old Town Pasadena that you had liked to go to. And I said, I need some help. His favorite is Kurt Vonnegut. And I don't remember if it was the owner, Peter, or if it was your dear friend, Brian Morganti, who helped me. Said, I've got this, and you'll see it's a little box with a book, and it's Kurt Vonnegut, the book Jailbird. And then when you open it up, you note that it has been signed by Kurt Vonnegut, and that it is copy number 222, which I guess I forgot about. Like, I love it when numbers are in a series like that. So this was truly a special book. And I feel like giving Bill that book opened the floodgates.
Gave me license.
It gave you license. Okay. So I'm also the one that got you a signed copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, signed by Harper Lee and inscribed to you, because she doesn't just sign, she will only sign to people. Really quickly, for listeners, if you don't know me, long before I worked for Weight Watchers, I worked for a company called Vanity Fair Intimates, the lingerie manufacturer. And Vanity Fair had its beginnings in Monroeville, Alabama, which is where both Harper Lee and the author Truman Capote, who's one of my favorites, both grew up. And it is a town that is so teeny tiny. And when I was first working for the company, every year they sent like all new managers down to Monroeville so they could see the makings of a bra, from the knit plant to the sew plant to the dye and finish plant. I'm doing that all out of order. And one of the things they do is they take you to this special little gift shop in town. And we went to the gift shop. And the woman who owned the store mentioned that she was really good friends with Harper Lee. She said that they had just come out, I think it was the 17th edition of the book. And does that sound about right?
It was actually the anniversary edition.
The anniversary edition. Okay. We probably should have taken that book off the shelf while we were talking also. Maybe we'll put it in an extra video. And she said, and I can get it signed for you. Harper, I don't remember if she said that she took the books to Harper. Harper came into the store to sign them, but was clear that she didn't want to sign books so that they would be worth more on the resale. She wanted them to be books that went to the person. So she inscribed one for Bill. And that was me just like allowing you to be even more engaged with collecting. Okay. So I am a clutter coach. And there was one point before I became a clutter coach where I noticed I was very overwhelmed by the stuff in our home and the secret's out of the bag. It was like when Marie Kondo's show was on TV and I watched and I was like, oh my God, we have to get rid of stuff. And you were so concerned about what was going to happen when we started letting go of books. Do you want to share any of that story, or, your side of the story, maybe?
Well, to me, books were an investment. If you talk to anybody who has a book collection, there is something to be said for first editions, rare books, books that are signed, books that are unique and one of a kind. And people collect things, whether they're Beanie Babies or baseball cards or spoons or shot glasses. With this whole Marie Kondo thing, I have amassed a pretty good collection of books. And the problem is, folks like us, meaning me and other people who are book fiends, it's a mania. It's an obsession to some degree, because it's all about, especially in the niche that I was in, which was the hunt and finding rare books. And I still can't go anywhere. Even when we go to a thrift shop, I have to go to the books, because you never know when you're going to find something on the shelf that is a signed first edition and maybe worth something or have some great value. And
let me ask you a question. I want to interrupt for a second, because I think when I bought this book for you, it was like $75 and it was our first anniversary. So for those of you who are listening right now, our anniversary is April 2nd. And this year is our 30th wedding anniversary. I think maybe I spent like $75 on this book 29 years ago. That's not the thrill of the find. That's investing. Do you have like a favorite or some favorites? Like, I found this at a yard sale in the back of the thrift shop and no one knew what they had item.
At one point, found a first edition of The World According to Garp in a dusty old, it wasn't even a thrift shop. It was like a junk shop. It was like an antique store in Pasadena, but like north of the freeway. So like way off the beat, not the part of Pasadena that's like really trendy and everything. And it was a dusty cover. And I'm like, oh, this is a first edition. And I ended up getting that. And I had a friend who basically was a very good book scout who has great stories to tell. He ended up moving back to Canada, and John Irving notoriously does not like to sign his books. But the story goes that in Canada, he will sign his books because they're not Americans. And it's not as...
I'd love to hear what he has to say now.
Well, it's not as cutthroat a business. And again, this was in the 19s at the time. And there's actually a story in one of Irving's books that came out after, like in the late 90s, where he talks about the main character has a run-in at the 92nd Street Y with book collectors, and it's kind of like it totally tracks based on that. Anyway, I sent this copy of GARP to my friend Brian, and he ended up going to an event which was his niche, going to these author signing events, the Harborfront Literary Festival, I think it was, in Toronto. And he got it signed for me. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have a signed first edition of GARP. Oh, this is great. And what ended up happening is several years later, John Lithgow was doing a signing of one of his children's books in a Barnes & Noble in New York City. And I got that signed by John Lithgow as well. Why would I do that? Because I'm kooky. And remember, if you know anything about The World According to GARP, John Lithgow appeared as a character in the movie with Robin Williams that was made in the early 80s. So that to me was an extremely rare item. Do I still have it? No. I ended up selling it at some point. I don't know how much I don't remember how much I sold it for, but in the moment, to me, it was like this great treasure and brought me immense pleasure that I could honestly say there might have been the only copy around that was signed by Lithgow and John Irving.
And do you miss that book?
You know what? I don't. I like the story.
Because I think some people who are listening or watching, if you're on YouTube, would be surprised to hear that. I mean, and what we should also say is that Irving is one of both of our favorites. Some really amazing literature. So I think some people would be surprised to hear that you had like this really prized item and we're okay letting it go. Did you feel differently then than you do now, or could you even remember?
Here's the truth of the matter. The fact that it is something that it does not torment me or anything like that. So obviously I could live without it. And that's one of those things you say, can you live without this? I feel more haunted by a bunch of other books signed by Haruki Murakami, but it was a period in time where I needed some money and I needed to sell them. And I thought, well, they won't go up that much in value, but I was wrong. So
we had to pay for our kids' bat mitzvahs somehow.
I got a great return on investment on those books. Because I had sold a handful of them. So those are the ones I kind of miss. But at the same time, it's interesting. He had a new book that just came out. I got it in November. I read maybe 10 pages of it, and the shine on Murakami has kind of gone off. So I'm like, it's okay. But but aside from that, there's not any books that I don't have anymore that I wish that I still had. That I've made peace with the fact that, and that's something that book collectors and book scouts and book fans kind of come to terms with, is that, well, if it's not with me anymore, it's gone to somebody else has that and is probably cherishes it more than I did because I got rid of it. And they kept it. So I'm curious where it is now. But I mean, it's one of those things that's interesting about books, and especially older books. So that's one of the things that is kind of changed in my life as I've gotten older, is that I've come to realize that these are physical objects that give me pleasure now, but not a lot of people feel the same way about my books. Nobody feels the same way about my books than the way I feel.
I'm going to interrupt because there are so many things to comment on based on everything you just said. So I'm going to ask a whole bunch of questions. One, I want to know, like, other than this one, what book are you completely unwilling to get rid of? And then I also want to give an opportunity to say, like, the book thing wasn't just Bill. Like, I take a lot of credit for the books. However, while Bill's collection is predominantly grown-up books, the collection that I have that I won't let go of are children's books. And in some cases, I've kept like maybe 10 books of mine that were favorites. And since they were from my childhood over 50 years ago, a lot of them are out of print. And in fact, 2 of those books are not just out of print, but cost well over $150, replaced right now with editions that are not in great condition. So they're not meaningful to me because they're worth a lot of money. They're meaningful to me because one of them is called the Great Flying Hockey Stick, and if you don't know me, my dad played street hockey well into his 40s. So hockey sticks were a big deal. And it's a lovely story about a little boy traveling around the world on a flying hockey stick. And the other one is The Great Escape, otherwise known as the Great Sewer Story. And it's about alligators living underneath the subway. I'm like such a New York kid. And it is a really lovely and brilliant book. But we also have a ton of children's books that belong to our kids that we're not willing to get rid of, because someday I hope there will be grandchildren to read these books with. But we have a ton of books for the girls that had been signed by the authors. You want to talk about Jolie? Jolie's our older daughter who is 28. You want to talk about her first book signing event?
Sure. I was with my friend Brian, and this was after I graduated from college. Brian, the book scout, the one who eventually moved to Toronto, he alerted me to the fact that Alice Walker was going to be at my alma mater doing a reading. And so I think Melanie was traveling at the time and had left me with Jolie. And so I brought Jolie with me. And there's a photo we have somewhere of Jolie strapped to my chest, and me and Brian and I standing in front of Alice Walker with a stack of books. And then you could kind of tell Jolie's looking at Ms. Walker signing those books. And so there's books that those were kind of special to me in that sense of the thing as well. I still have a couple of those lying around. The thing is, the books that I managed to retain and keep are ones that I justify in so doing because they are inscribed specifically to me, and not like that Vonnegut. That Vonnegut is special for a whole other reason. They mean something to me because they're inscribed to me, and it's funny by virtue of the fact that they're inscribed to me, that actually decreases their value. Because if you're a book collector and you want a first edition of The Road to Wellville by T.C. Boyle, you don't want a copy that says to Bill Cohen, Con Amistad, with friendship, one that just has his signature on it, because then that's more desirable from the perspective of a book collector.
Also an amazing book, T.C. Boyle being a house favorite also, or a couple favorite. I don't know that the kids care. So I know I asked, like, is there a book like you would be devastated to get rid of it? Like, you have to keep it. What book would that be?
Well, I'm going to say the Vonnegut there because our anniversary is coming up, and that was our anniversary gift. So, I mean, that's insanely special to me. My friend Brian hooked me up with another book that has a couple of screenplays in it, Even Cowgirls Get the Blues and My Own Private Idaho. And he got it's a paperback first edition from England, and the first got it signed for me by Gus Van Sant that says to Bill with love, Gus Van Sant. And then I'm like, well, I had the great honor of meeting Tom Robbins maybe 15, 20 years ago when he was signing books. I brought that to him and he signed it and inscribed it to Bill with love from me too, Tom Robbins. So that to me is one of those things that I would never get rid of because it's so unique and special from that perspective.
And Tom Robbins, another like favorite around here, I think. For me, definitely. So let me ask a question, because I feel like we need to talk about two things. One is digital books. But the other one I wanted to talk about is we recently watched a really wonderful documentary about book people. I don't even remember the name. I probably should have. All the information on the documentary will be in the show notes. So there'll be a link so you can watch it because it's really quite wonderful, but maybe you can say a thing or two about it.
Yeah, it was interesting because it's really about antiquarian book collecting and not necessarily more of those modern first editions that were the ones that I was into because they're possible to find, and also something that I could afford to get. You could pick up a first edition of a novel by an up and coming author on a remainder table at Barnes and Noble, and it would potentially be worth something. It's all up here in my brain. They talk to a lot of book collectors and the history of book collecting in New York City, and more high-end auctions, going to the antiquarian book fair at the Armory on the Upper East Side. I attended that once and it was like, this is great, but I can't afford any of these books. It's like $1,000 books. I'm like, no,
Right.
not yet. Someday, maybe. So, I mean, it's really interesting from that perspective, but interesting from the perspective of a book's provenance and where it came from. And the anecdotal stories of books that are curated or donated to libraries as what they call association copies of books that once belonged to somebody else that now were given to another author and so have double meanings and whatnot. The problem with books is, and I'm going to kind of segue here, is that they weigh a lot. They take up a lot of space, and not everybody appreciates them as much as the person who is collecting them. You certainly appreciate them to some degree, but when you're getting older and you think about a legacy and like, what am I going to leave behind? What's going to happen if a meteor crashes down and smashes me on the street? What's going to happen to my books? Well, I mean, quite honestly, I don't think that my kids care that much about my books and what is going to happen to them. In a sense, I almost see them as a burden to them because, and if you think about it, to anybody who doesn't care about books, if they have an aging parent who does, and that parent dies, those books are not a collection unless they're worth a lot and have been assessed and are going to sell for a lot of money. They're going to be a burden. And which is why sometimes in like library sales or yard sales, people find these gems because it's often, I can't deal with trying to figure out how much these are worth. I can't deal with putting them all in boxes and going to a bookstore and trying to haggle with somebody about what they're worth. Right. I'll just sell them out on the street. They're a finite amount. I rarely get new books. I don't go out collecting. One of my obsessions has been that I have a set of the Best American Poetry Anthology from its initial volume in 1989 to the year 2019, I believe. So, and I went to poetry readings all over the U.S. I went to book festivals in L.A. I went to poetry festivals in New Jersey. I went to book signings in New York. And so a lot of these amazing volumes are signed by 20, 25 different poets. Many of them, I have signatures from Nobel laureates, Pulitzer Prize winners, National Book Award winners, amazing writers. And I once considered selling them as a group and talked to a book dealer who was a specialist. And he said, and I'll paraphrase the best I can, it sounds like a wonderful collection to have, but an impossible one to sell. Because again, many of those books were signed or specifically inscribed to me. And it's very, very pigeonholed unique in that they're, as a collective group, it's a lot. So, and then I will say one of the best things about the pandemic in 2020 is that people stopped going to poetry readings and book signings. And now people are starting to return to that, but it's still not the same type of like mass event where authors are comfortable signing books for people face to face, just because, those folks tend to be older in a lot of cases, and you're dealing with the public, and it could be potentially, life threatening if you think about it in the sense. Sure. And so my Best American Poetry collection, which I always loved bragging about the fact that it was a complete set, they're still publishing them, but I haven't gotten any of the last 4 or 5 years since the pandemic started. And it kind of allowed me to kind of cut it off there, punctuate it with, this is my pre-COVID collection, right? And it would be something that I know one day I'm going to die and my kids are going to be like, what are we going to do with this shit?
Well, and one of the things that I keep trying to communicate to the kids, or at least Shayna, because our daughter Shayna, at least for the moment, still lives at home. So it's more of an ongoing conversation. And I don't want them to be weighed down by our stuff.
Right.
That, I would hope that there are things that are meaningful that they would want to hang on to. But if everything is meaningful, then nothing is meaningful, which means to me that they should keep the things that are meaningful to them, not the things that are meaningful to me. And that's a hard conversation to have. But at the end of the day, when we're gone, I want them to be able to remember us in a very like happy and loving way. And will they feel that way immediately if they've got a ton of shit they got to clean up? as opposed to being able to dive into the let's share stories, like let's listen to their favorite music or eat their favorite foods or something that would be meaningful. So I want to switch gears for a second. And I want to make sure that we spend a little bit of time talking about books that do not have paper. I want to talk about things like Kindles and Amazon Fires or wherever else people are reading things digitally. I just want your opinion, some thoughts from you on that, because I know how I feel about it.
Well, I mean, personally, that's not for me. I've tried reading things digitally, and to me, there is less pleasure in that act than there is in holding something and feeling it and smelling it and turning the pages and listening to the pages. And maybe that's because I'm an old fuddy-duddy that is, from a different generation, because I know people who love their Kindles. They're great from the perspective of the fact that they do not. You could take our entire 2 bookcases in our living room and it could be all on one device.
Right. To me, that means it makes sense for travel. Instead of carrying through, if you're the kind of person who's going to read a lot on vacation, to carry 3 big books can be cumbersome to some
Right.
people and would prefer to have it digitally. I just have to say, for me, I feel like we spend so much time on our computers, our phones, our tablets, whatever those things are. If I'm reading, I don't want to do it on that same thing I'm spending my whole day on for work and other purposes. I would much rather open a book and turn the pages, the old fashioned way. So yeah, it's just a thought of mine. I do know that for me, I also have a thing about, are we listening to a book? And I remember when I was in the car a lot when we were living in LA and I was all over Los Angeles for work, being in a different location every day, that I loved books on tape. And I remember a trip we drove out to Palm Springs. I think it was either for Ying's wedding or for the baby shower. And we had taken out a box set of short stories by Stephen King. And we were driving in the dark, listening to this really scary story. What was that?
It was terrifying.
It was terrible. We had to stop listening. But I think it speaks to how that form can be incredibly entertaining. And, I don't remember who was reading the story. It had so much to do with whatever actor or reader it was, being able to do the voices and the tones. And for me, while that's not reading a book and turning the pages, that can be very impactful. And I know for some people, specifically if like in an autobiography, if the person whose book it is the one doing the reading, that can also be incredibly moving because it is their story. Right. That they're sharing. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm demonizing reading digitally or listening to things. I just know that for some people, it can help with the clutter if we're choosing to read or listen in different ways. It's just not always the best thing for me.
Right. I'm very blessed to live in a city that has a very vibrant and robust library system where I can go to the library near my office in Lower Manhattan and pick out books off the shelves and take them home and decide whether or not I want to read them or not. Or I can search online for the book and order it to be delivered to that specific library. The New York Public Library has a great digital reading tool as well. Right. It's just, to me, there's something special about the books. And I think that was something that was touched upon in the documentary, is that the internet, from the perspective of book collecting, kind of killed that business, because it used to be, if you wanted a specific book, you would have to go looking for it and pouring through book dealer catalogs and whatnot. Now, if you ask me for a specific book that you think is rare, I can probably find it because there are websites that are aggregates of all the other book sites out there. And I'm like, oh, look, I found this signed first edition of Toni Morrison's Paradise, which was one of her latest that came out in like the early part of this century in the 2000s. And if you go to online and you think, well, here is a book signed by an American Nobel laureate, and you probably could get it for less than $20 because she signed a lot with book plates and it's on the internet and people know this is a signed book by a famous person. So people know it's the stuff that people don't realize are famous or valuable that are the ones that I still keep an eye out for. There's exceptions. There's a book, a novelist from LA in the early part of the 20th century that is very obscure, but he was a big inspiration to the poet Charles Bukowski. And I won't say his name here because I don't want anyone else to look for books by him, but I'm convinced that one day I'm going to be walking down the street in Brooklyn, in Bay Ridge, and I'm going to stop and somebody's going to have a first edition of one of his books. And
maybe not Bay Ridge, but it could be another neighborhood. You never know. It's that moment. It's a thrill to find. I'm the same way about like a really great dress at the thrift shop. I want to stop us for a second because I want to make sure that we get everything in before the episode goes too long. And I am going to be showing pictures and stuff like that because I'm a clutter coach. So the question of organization is going to come in at some point. And I don't want people to think that like Bill has cornered the market in our family in terms of book collections. And I can tell you that as a kid, I was obsessed with my books and I loved to lend them to friends. And I created my very own like library system. And if you all don't know, my mother's first master's degree is in library science. My mother was a librarian. She worked in the science library at one of the colleges in New York, maybe more than one, for a period of time. We had a huge book collection in our home. I also grew up in this really enormous Upper West Side apartment. At one point, my parents had floor to ceiling bookshelves created for them. And I saw great joy in both of my parents putting their books on the shelves. My dad, all these like scientific journals and things. And they had a Shakespeare collection. Also, one of my favorite collections they had was a complete collection of the Peanuts books. There must have been like 15 to 20 of them. I absolutely loved all that stuff. But I played with how to organize my books. My library system for a period of time were alphabetized by author. For a period of time were alphabetized by book title, which didn't work as well as the author one. I also for a period of time organized by color, which is something that you gave me permission to do when we were done downsizing the books. And when I say done, we're not always done. There are times where we bring new books home, which means we have to let other books go. If you had your way, how would they be organized?
Probably by category and like my first edition, like fiction and poetry, nonfiction, that sort of thing. So
any feelings about the red books being with the red books and the black books being with the black books and the white books being with the white books and the blue books being with the blue? Any feelings?
I made peace with that. It looks nice. So
there you go.
I had a revelation when my time on this earth comes, and hopefully that's not for a while.
Long time,
but I'm pretty sure that the top 10 things I'm going to be thinking about won't include my books. That's my goal. And it's like, okay, they're just items. And if I had children that cherished these specific books the same way that I did, then they're going to my child. And that is not to say that my kids do not like books. My kids are very good readers. It's just that they don't care about them as material collectible objects in the same way that I do, My
goal was to not have anybody think that they needed to listen to this because they were going to be encouraged to get rid of all of their books. I would never do that. We talk a lot about how we have emotional attachments to our things. And if we are so attached that we need to keep, then we need to keep it. But knowing that if clutter has the potential of getting in the way of us living a happy and a healthy life, then we need to contemplate then what is important for me to get rid of. And for some people, it may be books. And again, not the entire collection, but how do I determine what is special enough that I want to hold on to it the same way. I've been thinking this whole time, I need to do an episode with Shayna so we can talk baseball and other sports cards, you know? So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we talked about was the shirt that you're wearing. Do you want to like show it better or
Sure.
anything like that?
This was a gift from you know who, and it is the entire novel Cat's Cradle, written by Kurt Vonnegut. It's the entire novel, and it goes all the way on the back. So it's it. And I don't know if we can get really close.
You can see that they're okay. Now that you're getting closer, you can see that they're words. And so here's the thing that I love about this, because I can't remember the name of the company that makes them, but I'll be sure to add it to the show notes. They make scarves and shirts and tote bags that have like every single word of a famous book. And I thought this is a really great way to own the book. Not that Bill is reading the shirt, but a way to have a personal attachment to a very special book or author without it being another book on the shelf, being able to, you know, love it in another way.
Right. And for the most part, unless there's like a special association or something specific, like a signature, or you really care about it being a first edition. If somebody came into my home tomorrow and took all my books away, at some point, if I wanted to read that book again, I could read it again because I could go to the library, or I could order another copy or find it online. So I've evolved to the point where my books, the ones that I still have, I occasionally will pick them up and look at them. We call it fetishizing them. You just kind of look at it, or you smell it, and it's just, you're like, I look at it and I say, this signature or the Norman Mailer I have signed. I have such great memories of the event going with my friend Brian, and
Right.
Brian's strategy to overcome the one book signed per person list, and how he kind of engaged Mr. Mailer in an argument so that he kept just signing everything he put in front of him.
I remember that story.
Those things I think are, those are like irreplaceable. But at some point in our lives, when we're not here anymore, those are just items that aren't necessarily going to have the same meaning to the people who have them after us. Right. And life is short. Kind of coming to terms with the fact that, instead of amassing more and more books, I generally will not buy books because I know I can get them. Or if I do buy them, or if I do buy a copy, I eventually will donate it, or there are places I resell it. And I will tell you, there was a time like 5 or 6 years ago, I had a bunch of poetry books that I'm like, these are signed, but nobody's going to buy them for me. But I knew a bunch of poets, and I had befriended one who is a poet in Ohio. And I said, hey, you want some poetry books? Some of them are signed. And he's like, sure. And I'm like, okay, I'm sending you a box. Give me your address. And I sent him like 10 or 15 books. It wasn't, and he was like, this is so cool. Cause it's like, I didn't tell him what I was sending him. And
he was special. Yeah.
So that's something too. We had a holiday event, and I gifted my copy of Toni Morrison's Paradise with a signed book plate in it to somebody that I knew would appreciate it, that I worked with. And she was like, I can't believe you gave me this. And I'm like, it's my pleasure to give it to you. Books are special.
Yeah. Books are special, and book gifts are special. I wanted to talk about one more book collection before we finish up, because I realized, since I'm in the office and you're in the dining room, I have a feeling you may not know what I'm about to talk about. Well,
okay.
Maybe. So one of my favorite authors since the 90s was Kinky Friedman, who we lost last year. And he was a lot more than an author. He was a Jewish cowboy country singer, cat and dog rescuer, and mystery novelist. And here's one of the things I love about books. I always read during lunch. I was working at the mall and as a store manager at the time. And I went to the bookstore and I was looking for a book because I finished the book I was reading. And I was so taken by the title, Elvis, Jesus, and Coca-Cola. And I said, okay. And I look at the back cover or whatever. And I said, I'm going to give it a try. So sometimes it's a title. I didn't know the author, although when I saw that the author's name was Kinky Friedman and that he was a Jewish cowboy country singer and mystery novelist, I said, you know what, I think I need to read this. and then proceeded to read every book that he had ever written. Every time he came out with a new book, we would go to the book signing and he would sign the book. And I have every single book is signed. And they're definitely books that I would read again. There's a couple of them that I read multiple times because they're fun and they're quick and they're easy. And he's just goofy and great. I don't want to get rid of those books. And I have a feeling our kids are not interested in them at all. We do have pictures of them at signings with him, but for now, it's something that gives me a lot of joy. If you made me get rid of them, I probably would hang on to Elvis Jesus and Coca-Cola because it was my first, and then have to decide of the other ones, like, which is my favorite. And you've read all of them too, right?
Right. And I helped you get some of those signed. And there's some that are signed by characters because there were guys that, this is all in New York City. There are characters from New York City that were characters in the book. And they would show up at the signings and were like, hey, you want to sign this Ratso? Okay, cool.
Ratso Slowman.
Willie Nelson was a character in one of his books, and Willie showed up at one of the book signings. And so one of those copies is signed by Kinky and Willie Nelson. So that one I think is
there
pretty.
You go.
And see, that's where I think we get to the fact when you get the books to be unique in their own special way, above and beyond just their existence, and that they have that extra meaning, then I think it's like justified to, like, you know, we got to keep this because there's a story behind it. It's just, I always thought I would have be living somewhere where it'd just be books everywhere on the walls, but we have a very modest collection, in my opinion. Some people might not think so, but
well, we live in your average New York City apartment. What is this, about 900 as an 1,100 square feet? No, I mean, so we have stuff. And I think it's important for everybody to remember that one person's clutter is someone else's clean, and someone else's clean is someone else's clutter. And you have to find the fit that works for you. So we're going to have to finish up. Bill and I could talk for hours, and you've definitely inspired me that, like, we'll do, family episodes. I'm going to get Shayna on to talk about baseball cards. We'll figure out what kind of clutter Jolie can talk about. But in the meantime, I really want to thank you for being here. You were not my first guest or second or third guest, but your episode is going to air the week of our anniversary. We are recording in advance. I think that timing is quite perfect. And I want to thank you for being a part of this decluttering journey with me. I think what's really important for people to hear is that this can be hard because so many of us are sharing space with somebody else who often doesn't have the same feelings we do about clutter. And in fact, there will be a future episode about this, but men are much less likely to be stressed by their clutter than women. I think it's like women are 66% more likely to be stressed by clutter and stuff than men. So there's not necessarily anything wrong with the men in our lives if they're a little more cluttered than we are. It is just in their genetics, if you will. So again, Bill, thank you for being here. If you guys liked this episode, if you enjoyed it, if it resonated with you, check out the show notes. We're going to have so many different resources for you to go to. And if this resonated with you, I'm sure you have friends that would enjoy this episode also. So please share with your friends and family. All right, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Lighten Up, the Art of Living Clutter-Free. I hope you found a spark of inspiration to help declutter not just your space, but your mind and life as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could use a little lightness in their life. Remember, it's not about being perfect, it's about progress. Small steps lead to big changes, and I'm here to help you every step of the way. For more tips, resources, and ways to connect, check out my website, follow me on social media, and don't forget to check out the Design Your Healthy Life Strategy program to take your transformation even further. Until next time, keep letting go of what no longer serves you and making room for what truly lights you up.